Thank you very much, and thank you for your willingness to serve once again in government. I want to continue on the theme of human rights. I think it is an essential part of our foreign policy. And I think you know this from your time in government and outside of it, that so many of the groups around the world who are fighting for the principles that we as a nation stand for, democracy, free press, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, they look for America for inspiration. I've been touched deeply by examples of that just in the last 3 months. Sometimes we give these speeches on the Senate floor, we don't think anybody hears them, and then you get to interact with someone that was recently released from a prison, and they tell you that what we did in a resolution or in a hearing or on the Senate floor was impactful and ran counter to the oppressor's message to them that they don't matter to anybody, nobody cares about you. And while I think it's important that we here in the Senate continue to stand for these principles, I also think it's important we have a State Department that is structured in a way that shows that this is a priority of the United States. There's no shortage of these, obviously. In Iran, we know about their grotesque human rights record. In Syria, we've seen the horrifying crimes committed against innocent civilians. We also have challenges with some allies in the region, and I think perhaps that is some of the messaging that the Secretary was pointing to. Egypt is an ally. It is also a human rights violator. And it is important for us as their ally to tell them that that is an unsustainable position moving forward. Saudi Arabia is a country we work with very closely, and yet it is not a human rights star, to say the least. In Asia, we're obviously talk a lot about the North Korean nuclear weapon. We don't talk nearly enough about the forced labor camps that exist there, a horrifying reality. And of course, in China, we could have days and days of testimony about the thousands of political prisoners. In Europe, obviously, we're aware of Russia's horrifying human rights record. We've seen recently in the pro-Russian areas of Chechnya how LGBT gay men have been rounded up and put in jail. And again, another horrifying instance. But in our own hemisphere, even as we stand now, we see horrifying human rights violations in Venezuela, dozens of people that have been in jail, some for upwards of 3 years, total ignoring the constitution of that country, the security forces firing on protesters in the street, and of course, one that I know is near to you and to me, the issue of Cuba, where we still, despite all this celebratory language about an opening, there are people in jail in Cuba. There are people being rounded up in Cuba. There are people being oppressed systematically in Cuba. I believe the Cuban people are deserving of freedom and democracy just like the people in the Dominican Republic have, just like the people in Haiti just had an election, just like the people in Colombia, just like the people. Why are Cubans any less worthy of those basic freedoms? And what I would ask you to share with the committee is what you shared with me on the issue of human rights, in particular with Cuba, but broader. This is not just an issue that is of academic interest. In your own family, through marriage, you actually have a gentleman who experienced the horrifying violation of human rights, who experienced being jailed by an oppressive regime, and who is a Floridian. And you shared that story with me, and to me that's very important because it tells me that we have someone here before us who understands human rights and oppression, not because he read about it in a book, because he knows and loves someone who himself has been a victim of the denial of freedom. And I would just invite you to share with the committee for a moment the story of this incredible man and the impact that he's had on your thinking with regards to all of this.
Thank you, Senator. You're referring to my wife and my mother-in-law's uncle, Jose Pujals, who was a political prisoner in Cuba for 27 years, over 27 years. He was one of the so-called plantados in Castro's prisons. He spent
Explain the plantado.
Plantados were those prisoners who refused to cooperate, refused to wear prison uniforms. They were planted in their cells, and he was in solitary confinement for 7 years. He was sustained by his religious faith, his Catholic faith, his wife, who, despite the fact that she had the opportunity to leave Cuba and come to the United States, stayed on the island so that she could, in those few opportunities when she could, meet with him. He was released from prison a week after my wife and I got married in 1988, and he's still alive today. He's 92, almost 93 years old, and he's a great inspiration to our family and an inspiration to me, and someone that my experience in talking to him inspires me to serve in the United States government, to ensure that our government provides the leadership that's necessary to protect human rights around the world, to protect men like Jose Pujals.
And I would just close by saying, as proof that there is justice in the universe, Jose is alive and his oppressor is dead.
Amen.